welcome to Diversify's event. We're talking about diversity and inclusion. So this is an initiative from Diversify where we were rolling out a series of training that we'll be doing, where we're giving lots of hints and tips for the community, for businesses in general in the community, just so that we can bolster diversity and inclusion in the community, not just here in Oslo, in Norway in general, but do our bit to contribute around the world. So welcome to this event today. My name is Hyacinth Walters Olsen. Yes, my name is a flower. My mother liked flowers. And for those of you living in Norway, yes, it is the same name as the lady from Keeping Up Appearances. I'll just answer that for everybody at the same time, because that's usually what I get. Is that lady? Yes. And yes, I am a lot like her too. So very much taking control of the reins. So welcome. My background is I work as a consultant with Diversify and their team delivering diversity and inclusion training around Norway. So hence me here moderating this event today. Really looking forward to getting stuck into this. So before I speak any further, I can sit here and talk all day long. I will ask our wonderful panelists to introduce themselves instead of me doing it for them. So I will start with Chisholm. Would you like to introduce yourself for me, please?
Yes. Hi, guys. I have a thing with my camera, so if it looks like I'm looking away, it's not intentional. I'm tech challenged today. But my name is Chisom. I am Nigerian, and I grew up in the United States, but I've also spent the past 10 years, 11 years in Europe as well. I have been in Norway now for about 4 years. I am the founder of Diversify and Her Space, and my consulting company called Metal Consult. I am an economist by training, and yeah, I'm happy to be here and happy to have this conversation about diversity and inclusion. It's something that I burn for, and I have been actively learning about and challenging myself and others around me for the better part of the past 8 years. So I'm looking forward to having more of this conversation here today. And thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time.
Great. Thank you so much, Chisholm. Alison, could I come to you? Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, it's really nice to be here, and thank you so much to Chisholm and to you for having us. As I said, my name is Alison. I'm currently the head of operations at Business for Peace here in Oslo, Norway. It's a foundation that really believes that all businesses should be working towards the greater good in everything that they do. So I moved here to Norway about 3 years ago to work on that. But before that, I was born and raised in Toronto in Canada. And for me, that was really formative. I think up until London surpassed it last year, it's always been the most diverse city in the world. Not always, but in my lifetime. 50% of the population there in that city is not born in Canada. And so that's been quite formative to me and how I've experienced diversity and inclusion. And most of my career up until this point has been in the arts and culture sector, which I think in most countries is a bit ahead of the times in terms of making efforts towards inclusion. So that's, yeah, I think all I need to say about my background to get started. Thanks.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Alison. And Faye, can we come to you, please?
Yes. So hello, everyone, and thank you so much to Diversify for having me here today. My name is Faye, named after the American actress Faye Dunaway. So I'm a program manager at Business for Peace. I have a background in international business management, and I am originally from Trinidad and Tobago, which is an island in the Caribbean, for those of you who don't know. Before I moved to Norway, I worked for the Ministry of Planning and Sustainable Development in my country, and a lot of the work that we did focused on sustainability, innovation, and entrepreneurship, but on the policy planning side. So when I moved to Norway, which was in 2014, this was something that I wanted to continue with, but I quickly realized that as a new immigrant, it was a struggle to establish myself and to integrate into the society. And then I quickly realized how difficult it would be for other women, you know, in minority backgrounds in a new country with no, not a big family network or no friends to integrate and to be seen. So this experience is something that I take with me in everything that I do, including in my position now in Business for Peace. As Alison said, Business for Peace is an organization that inspires ethical and responsible leadership. So when I'm programming and designing events, diversity and inclusion is always at the forefront of my mind. So with that, I just want to say I'm looking forward to the conversation that we'll have today.
Awesome, thank you so much. And yes, just to give you a little bit more background about myself, I'm from the UK, you might have heard my accent, originally parents from Jamaica. I've been a bit of a citizen of the world, lived in 6 countries, 6 cities, 9 countries, 9 cities, 6 countries, get that right. So I've been a bit of a citizen of the world, and so diversity inclusion has been a big part of having been a leader, having been working in business development, most recently working CEO of Fotobarn RS here in Oslo for the past 2.5 years. So yes, diversity and inclusion are a huge part of what I've been doing, and also working as a consultant with Diversify, delivering training on their behalf as well. So some of the programs that we've been delivering has either been, you know, setting up a full program, going into companies and looking at how to establish a policy for them, or looking at what they already have that's existing and doing a fine-tuning of that, and just providing them with something new. So we have a jam-packed session for you today, and so I'm going to jump straight in. We've got lots of questions, and I'm going to just throw the first question out there. So diversity and inclusion, they're buzzwords today, lots of people talk about it, but what is diversity and what's inclusion? So could I ask this, this will go to the 3 of you. Chisholm, I'll start with you. What's your perspective of diversity and inclusion? Are they the same thing?
No, thank you, Hyacinth. No, I think that, as you said, you know, diversity and inclusion is something that people talk about and throw around these days. And actually with diversity and inclusion, people also use them interchangeably, but they're actually quite different. I personally, and I always say this, I like to think of diversity as a science and inclusion as an art, and I will explain why. So if we look at the standard definition of diversity in social context, you know, diversity is quite infinite. You know, they include all characteristics that, you know, people can have, including hair color, eye color. But when we're talking about it within the construct of workplaces, you know, we're looking at 7 main types of diversity. And these diversity parameters are often protected by law in many countries, and they include racial diversity, age diversity, sex or gender diversity, sexual orientation, disability, cultural diversity, and religious diversity. We have additional types of diversity. They are intangible, but also just as important as the 7 I just listed, and they include, you know, education, personality, socioeconomic background, say class diversity, general worldview, so opinions, and life experiences. So when we ask, why is diversity important? Of course, the business case for diversity has been made and factualized over the years. Like, I don't think it's something that we need to argue for, because we know it's something that's necessary. I think when we look at it from a business context, you know, if a team is homogeneous, if we have the same background, if we have the same race, if we have the same gender, or even perspectives, then we might not be as innovative or successful as we could be. So which brings me to inclusion. which is what I like to define as the arts, because the science is quite simple. You can get the right people in the room. But with the arts, it's thinking about, I mean, by definition, inclusion is defined as, I think, the practice of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized. So with it being an art, there is no blueprint. You know, it involves continuous education and awareness. It also requires emotional intelligence and empathy. In a workplace setting, what inclusion looks like is creating a culture where a diversity of people can come to work, they feel included, they feel confident to be themselves as they are, and they are empowered to deliver your business needs. So basically, this means that all your employees, men, women, Black, white, those with disability, trans people, you know, they are treated fairly and respectfully. They have equal access to opportunities and resources, and they feel like they can actively contribute to the success of an organization. So this is how I define it.
Okay, thank you. Alison, we'll come to you. The question was, are diversity and inclusion the same thing? Chisholm says no, she's given her perspective. What's your perspective on diversity and inclusion?
I very much agree with Chisholm, and I think she explains it so well. So I don't know how much more I have to expand on that. But yeah, to me, diversity it's almost the metrics. So, I mean, yes, you can check some boxes for yourself. It doesn't mean you actually have people feeling included and empowered and happy in your workplace. Inclusion is a much more active practice. It's equally important, but it really affects the day-to-day of people a lot more. I think I'll leave it at that at the definition level, because I know we'll get into a bit more examples later on.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And Faye, we come to you. Same question.
Yes, well, I agree with both Alison and Chisholm. They're definitely not the same thing. And as Alison said, it's metrics. Diversity is a numbers game for me. It's the demographics of the organization. I mean, we like to apply percentages. So we say 30% of the organization is diverse. We have 30% women, or so many with minority backgrounds. And I mean, at the end of the day, this is something that organizations aim for, and it's good. You can have an organization that's 30% diverse, but if they are all at, let's say, for example, low-level staff, or if they are not in decision-making positions, then this really isn't inclusion. So for me, I see inclusion as a focus on who is making the decisions, who is allowed to contribute ideas, who is invited to the after work Friday. You know, do all of your employees feel like they belong to the organization? And unless diversity is included within the social and professional dynamics of the organization, unless there's that culture of belongingness, then you won't get the benefits that diversity can bring to an organization. So for me, diversity and inclusion are two different things, and they will not succeed unless all of your employees feel like they are included. And I would like to continue on this point to perhaps give an example, if that's okay, Hyacinth, of perhaps one of the biggest challenges that I have experienced when it applies to inclusion is that sometimes management or employees that belong to the dominant culture, I think that's something we'll address later on, when those of the dominant culture, when they don't recognize inclusion as a problem. And I can give you an example, and it's from personal experience. And, you know, I was employed in a small organization, and I was the only person with minority background. And I was very excited, and the team was very nice, but, you know, I wasn't included in any decision making. This was okay. Maybe I wasn't experienced enough, but I wasn't included in the ski trips or the all staff retreats. I wasn't invited home to dinners, even though I know that was happening. And, you know, it really made me wonder if the problem was with me. But then I soon realized that it was not a problem that the organization recognized, you know, that was happening. And yes, it could have been easy for me to speak up, but for a lot of factors, you know, I just didn't have the courage to say anything. And what ended up happening was that I isolated myself. I stopped contributing to conversations, you know, I didn't want to go to work anymore. And this was just me, one person in a small organization. But if this same system happens in a larger organization with such a culture, then it can be really detrimental to employee productivity, employee engagement. You know, the bottom line of the organization will be affected at the end of the day. So I think in these situations, what needs to happen is that management needs to be aware of the culture that they are creating within an organization and say, am I doing all that I can to ensure that all my employees are included, even if it's just in conversation around the lunch table?
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Can I make a question, Hyacinth?
Could you, I'll just frame questions. Thank you for asking that, Johan, because I was going to mention questions. For any questions, could you please write them in the chat box? And then, you know, I will either slot them in or we'll ask the panelists at the end.
Thank
If you
you.
don't mind. Thank you. Now, not everybody has their cameras on, so I can only see a few people, but I think that was quite an emphatic no from all three panelists that diversity and inclusion are not the same thing. All who agree, hands up. If you don't agree, pretty much everybody put their hands up there saying that, you know, they're not the same thing. Everybody's in agreement as well. So I'm just wondering then, so why are diversity and inclusion often used in association with each other, in tandem with each other? Could I go to you, Alison, and ask you that question?
Sure, it's a good question. It's a bit of a guess for me to say that, especially in the workplace setting, maybe it started off with diversity metrics and that people would sort of pat themselves on the back for achieving what visibly looked like more diversity. And as we're progressing, we understand that it's not just that, it is about inclusion. So I think it is quite important to see the two different definitions and purposes of them. But yeah, that's my best guess at how they're linked, but I'm not sure if Faye or Chisholm has a different perspective on that.
Okay, well, I think, you know, we had some feedback from the three of you saying diversity is the science, the metrics, and inclusion, the art, the who, you know. So Chisholm, would you like to maybe answer that? Why you think diversity and inclusion are often used in tandem, in association with each other?
I think because people are not adequately educated about the difference. I think that if you look at the year we've had in 2020, you know, a lot more companies now care about diversity and inclusion because of the BLM protests that erupted across the world. But it's about, what do you know? Okay, so when this happened, you know, a lot of people I know, like we had conversations like, oh, really? Now they know? We've been talking about this for years. You know, on one hand, it's great that people are becoming aware, but it's not just enough to read a book or attend a workshop and think, oh yeah, I have this covered. So I think one of the problems or the reasons why, you know, diversity and inclusion is used interchangeably or thought to be the same thing is oftentimes people don't really understand the complexity of diversity in the first place and the complexities of inclusion. To know that you have to include people, in many cases, you have to have been excluded at one point or the other in your life. You know, if you're a person who's not faced any type of exclusion or discrimination, then things like this might not come naturally to you. So it requires education. And even for people who have been, you know, discriminated against or excluded, you still have to continually educate yourself. There are things you don't know. I look at myself and there's a lot I know about, you know, parameters around race and gender and disability, but there's a lot I still don't know about, say, trans people. And I'm actively working to learn and to talk to people and to ask questions so I'm better educated. So it's taking that responsibility to actually learn and to do it continuously.
Okay, thank you, Chisholm. Faye, could I just ask you, what do you think some of the main benefits are of having a diverse workplace?
Yes, you know, as Chisholm had mentioned earlier, there is a big business case for diversity. It leads to innovation, creation, employee motivation, and we can pull all the research reports about it. But I would give a benefit that is personal to me as well, being a new immigrant in Norway. For me, I see diversity and inclusion as a very important stepping stone for integration and inclusion in a wider national and cultural context. You know, new immigrants, regardless of their education and work experience, when they come to a new country, they are actively looking for networks, trying to get friends, establish themselves, understanding the work culture and social norms. How do you communicate with each other? And inclusion and, you know, organizations that encourage diversity, this can be a really powerful tool for encouraging integration and inclusion within a national context, because it is the single most important platform for building cultural understanding. You have an organization with so many people from diverse backgrounds working together for a common purpose. And what this does is that this builds bridges, it breaks down stereotypes, it facilitates that cultural understanding that is necessary for us to progress as a society. So enabling people to see that their differences are what can bring them together is a very powerful thing that organizations can do. And when this happens, then this is what leads to the business case for diversity. This is what leads to the innovation, creates room for creativity, better customer understanding, and a better bottom line at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to say, Miriam and Johan, I have seen your questions and I'm going to come back to those. Okay. Alison, I'm going to come back to you with the next question. And could you maybe tell us, do you think that diversity and inclusion plays, you know, a large role in organizational culture?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's impossible to separate. Organizational culture, I think it's important to talk about dominant culture that your organization has. Every team has one, every company has one, even your friend group has one. These are sort of the unspoken norms and the ways of doing things. And so if you have a very, same seeming workforce, then you have a very strong dominant culture. It's very hard for someone who's different in whatever way to feel included in that and welcome in that. So it's completely interwoven in the importance of really looking at what is your dominant culture, just to stop into question whether it's, if all your social time involves alcohol and maybe someone doesn't drink, if all your social time is after work and maybe someone has young kids, if everything is physically active and someone's not able to do that. It's just about, not just about, but you can really think differently about how you're going about every day, your meetings, your social time. I think it's incredibly important to look at these things in relation to each other.
Okay, fantastic. And so Chisholm, coming back to you now, how can we benefit from diversity and inclusion? How can organizations benefit from it?
I think it begins with educating ourselves about and getting rid of harmful biases when making employment decisions. So there's a lot of talk around diversity and inclusion in the workplace. You know, companies are actively trying to eliminate various forms of discrimination from their hiring processes. Some are actively looking to attract diverse candidates rather, be it by applying, say, blind resume screening methods or by hosting career days for specific groups. You know, some are talking about diversity and inviting outside, say, diversity and inclusion trainers to educate its workforce. So in talking about the hindrances for an organization to become more diverse and inclusive, and putting it into practice, we must address the elephant in the room, in this case, unconscious bias. So in the hiring process, unconscious bias happens when you form an opinion about candidates only on first impressions, you know, or when you prefer someone over the other simply because, you know, they seem like someone you could easily have a social life with outside of work, or maybe because they come from your country, they speak your language. I think if we effectively address unconscious bias, or in effectively addressing unconscious bias, we must acknowledge that it is something we all have, you know. It's quite humbling and also unnerving to sit with oneself in honesty and evaluate the bias and preconceived notions that we have. It might also lead us to understand that sometimes what we perceive as unconscious bias is actually quite conscious. You know, we make decisions every day based on our conscious biases, our gut feelings, and our unchallenged preconceived notions. So I think that in reality, there is some conscious bias present in the decisions that we make every day and in the decisions that managers make on who they want to employ. So the fact remains that even in early hiring stages, you know, a candidate's picture, their name, their nationality could influence their opinion a lot more, or your opinion a lot more than you think. So if you are not actively thinking about limiting unconscious bias in your work, if you're not actively doing the work, educating and re-educating yourself, then your progress in this regard could be quite limited. You know, unconscious bias influences your decisions, whether negatively or positively, because it uses criteria and assumptions that are actually not relevant to the job at hand. So we tend to make assumptions based on what we think we know, you know, based on our backgrounds, based on experiences and preferences, and then we act on these assumptions. So I would say that from my experience, you know, when I've spoken to hiring managers or leaders in the past on the topic of diversity and inclusion, they tend to often say, you know, they don't judge, they don't care who applies, the best candidates gets the job, etc., etc., you know, but this is not actually a fact. You know, if you leave unconscious and implicit bias unaddressed and unchallenged, then unconscious bias is heavily at play. So I guess the fact here is that managers choose candidates that they have a good feeling about, but oftentimes they actually cannot explain in concrete terms why they want to hire that person beyond the good feelings. So I guess to answer your question here, in order to reap the benefits of diversity, we actually have to educate ourselves and then start ensuring that every single person is in the room. And then the innovation that comes from that, the growth, the creativity, the impact on revenue that comes from that, you know, is beneficial to not just, you know, the team, but also to the company as a whole.
Okay, and just following on from what you're saying, Chisholm, about unconscious bias, do you believe that it can have an impact on a company, whether positive or negative?
I think it has negative impact most of the time. I think quite simply, unconscious bias is costing you money and talent as a company. It reduces your financial returns and it limits innovation. You know, the business case for diversity and inclusion has been made over and over again, like I said earlier. You know, it is literally written in stone for its positive effects across board, be it growth on innovation, on competitiveness, or for financial returns. So biased hiring decisions result in less diverse teams. So one way to check this out in your company is take a look at your company. If your team is not diverse enough, and I'm not only talking about gender diversity, I mean, that's great to have equal amounts of women and men, but it needs to go beyond that, you know? So if you find that diversity is not immediately obvious or apparent, then unconscious bias is heavily at play. So, I mean, the fact is that a lack of or minimum diversity hinders your company's productivity. You know, this is supported by facts. It's supported by research that, you know, companies perform better when they have greater ethnic and gender diversity, you know, so more diversity in your company equals more revenue. So in this sense, yes, unconscious bias, which affects the people you have in your company, the people you have in the room, the diversity of your team, has an absolute negative effect on your company.
Okay. Thank you, Chisholm. So just want to, Faye, I'm going to come to you because Johan had a question that touches on a little bit of what maybe Chisholm's talking about now and what you'd mentioned earlier about metrics. So Johan was saying that when you talk about percentages of a group as being diverse, how would you then define the rest of the percentage? Because isn't that by definition excluding some of the group and not including diversity? So he says from what he understands, this is excluding the majority in the definition of the word diversity, and I believe this is important to clarify. So would you like to expand upon that for us, please?
Yes. When I said diversity is a numbers game, what I meant here is that this is not my definition of diversity, but if you Google it, and if you Google organizational diversity or diversity within organizations, the first thing that you see coming up is the percentage of our organization that has this amount of women is so much percent. So for me, and in my perception, this percentages is what we use, is commonly used to define diversity, especially in the business environment. And this is not necessarily a white thing. A lot of my research was done in more Western countries. So then the assumption is that the majority group are white males, perhaps within a specific age group. But you have to look at this on a country by country basis. And an organization needs to define for itself what it means when it says diversity. If you look at my home country, Trinidad and Tobago, we were a very cosmopolitan country. So in an organization, a white male would probably not be seen, or diversity for us would not then be based on race or ethnicity or culture, but perhaps something else, because ethnic and cultural groups are already integrated very well into the organization. So then it would perhaps be gender or not. Gender is not even an issue for us, to be honest with you, but perhaps abilities or something else. So, I mean, diversity, it's, there is a common definition that is used. You can Google it and you can find it. But at the end of the day, it really is something that is dependent on the organization and organizational context itself. And I agree with you that we should not be excluding the majority as well. But at the end of the day, we are speaking about how do we include minority groups or groups that are very much largely excluded from organizations that usually can be dominated by white males, given that we are in a Western country.
Okay, I'd just like to expound upon that a little bit more, because when we're talking metrics, we're not necessarily, the majority group is also a part of the diversity of the organization. It's lots of various demographics. And so you're not excluding a particular demographic by saying, when you're looking at a company's overall diversity, they are included in the metrics or the measurement of a company's overall diversity. That's my understanding, and that's what we do when we're looking at diversity from an organization. I just have a comment here from Emma Jackson. Thank you, Emma, for your comment. Emma has said that she's been a recruiter for over 22 years, with 22 years experience, and she totally agrees with Chisholm that unchallenged unconscious bias can cost creativity, innovation, and can hit the bottom line and have a huge effect. So thank you very much for that comment, Emma. So now I'm just going to move on and get very practical. And Alison, I'm going to start with you. And what I'm going to ask you to do, please suggest your 3 top tips when it comes to diversity and inclusion, when it comes to recruitment.
For recruitment? Okay.
Yes.
Great. Because with recruitment, I think that you are responsible for recruiting a diversity of candidates. I don't have as much to say about the other end of the spectrum when it comes to quotas and hiring, but when it comes to recruitment, if you're not getting a diverse pool of candidates in however you are defining diversity, that is your problem. So it is advertising your ad in different places. It is saying that you value diversity and accessibility in your recruitment process and letting people know who they can email or contact if they need accommodation throughout the application process. So people understand that there is a place for them to be valued and included in that way. And then from what I understand with the Norwegian context, and again, I haven't been here so long, but maybe even ignoring names. I mean, I think it's helpful to be very honest. I mean, when I was hiring for a role in our company, I noticed I had an unconscious and then very conscious bias towards a native English speaker because of the type of role it was. And I had to stop myself and say, just because someone's native speaker or not doesn't mean their English isn't perfectly suitable for this job. And then, yeah, taking that, okay, then take another look at what you have in front of you and just give different resumes a chance, bring people in. You don't really know what you're going to find until you actually meet someone in person. So yeah, I'll do that there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Chisholm, can I come to you? Your 3 top tips for recruitment?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to add a bit to what Alison said, and I do agree with her. I think that beyond also saying that you value diversity and you're inclusive, you actually have to show it. And I think the thing, perhaps this is what a lot of companies miss, this is where they miss the mark, is sometimes they think saying it is enough, but people are not blind, people can see. And for me, even down to events, when they talk about, oh, for women empowerment, I can easily just look at the speaker list and I know it's not for me. I can look at the organization, their websites, to see who's in the management team, and obviously know, yeah, they haven't really thought about me. I mean, they want to address women, but it's not me. It's not my kind of woman. So it's also about practicing what you preach. So go beyond the talking, which is great, and saying like all the things that you do and you value, and actually value it. If you do your job right, you don't even have to tell people that you value diversity and you're inclusive, because it will show. They will know. So to continue from your question, Hyacinth, I think in terms of recruitment, I think that in recruitment, bias doesn't start and end when selecting candidates. It is imperative to go back, further back, and minimize bias, early on, even as early as where you find your talent in the first place. I know that a lot of companies in Norway, they prefer to hire from BI, NHH, NTNU, Oslo University, and maybe one more I'm forgetting, but there are so many other people who come from different parts of the world, or even universities in Norway, who are equally talented, that can be relevant for your company. So my second tip would be, don't only focus on diversifying your team. You also need to focus on diversifying your hiring process. So when you cast a wider net, you can explore new sources to reach potential candidates. You will reach new people who have the skills that you need and more. So if you normally would use Fin and all the different networks, try to do something else. Try to explore other networks that you might not consider. And that requires some work on your part. It means you might have to contact organizations that work with, different groups of people to see how you can pull in all those resources to your organization. And I think number 3 would be to find a diverse talent. You need to think more creatively and be flexible about how you get the right skills to your company. So it is important to remove barriers and start looking for candidates who are different from the current employee pool that you have. So search for candidates who do not have the traditional backgrounds. Get people into the room who are Black, gay, brown, people who have disability. Bring people into the room who have taken a career break, people who want to make a career change. Bring people into the room who do not have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree from your preferred top 5 university, or who do not have degrees, period. But so long as they have the experience, the track record, and the tenacity to do the job. So these are 3 practical ways you could actually start improving your recruiting process today.
Okay, thank you so much, Chisholm. We're getting some great tips here. I hope you guys are taking notes. I'm like furiously scribbling here. Faye, can I come to you? Do you have 3 top tips?
For recruitment as well?
Yes.
Yes, I have to agree with both points that were made. For me, I think it's very important to increase your outreach to ensure that you have a diverse pool of candidates. And I just want to give a little bit of research here from Harvard Business Review, and they speak about something called the 2 in the pool effect. And what their research found was that if your final candidate pool only has one minority candidate, then the odds of hiring that person, is very low. But if you have at least two minority candidates in the final candidate pool, then the odds of hiring that minority candidate is 194 times greater, just by having one additional candidate. So I think by finding new and creative ways to perhaps advertise your vacancy to ensure that you are able to attract a diverse enough pool of candidates, then this increases the chances of you having a more diversity in at least within the hiring process. So as Chizom said, reach out to your personal network, use recruitment agencies that prioritize diversity. So for example, here in Norway, we have Skillhus. Highlight maybe your company's diversity and inclusion values in the job ad. I mean, a lot of people don't necessarily agree with that because they say it's just, decoration. But for me, I feel a sense of, okay, at least they care enough to show that they have some sort of values in the job ad. Reach out to social entrepreneurs who work with minority groups or maybe even disability groups and ask around. So go out and be proactive, and then these things can make a great deal of difference in the type of candidates that you can attract.
Exactly. Thank you guys so much. I really love the idea of not just looking for the typical candidates. One thing I have noticed quite a lot here in Norway in recruitment is that nearly every job ad says, oh, you need to have a master's degree, you need to have this degree, that degree, the other degree. And that is really kind of excluding a lot of people. And I actually would have been one of those diversity hires because I don't have a degree. However, I have worked very hard and have worked my way up to executive level in several companies. I've been the director of customer relations for 8 years for an international finance company that had customers in over 130 countries. I'm CEO of a company here in Norway. So I didn't go to university. I don't have a degree, but it doesn't mean that I'm not intelligent. And there's a lot of people who are excluded from that recruitment pool that I see here that really face a challenge that, they look at an application straight away, they're discouraged because it's not encouraged to apply without education. So moving on from there, thank you. Carrying on with 3 top tips. Lots of feedback. People are really enjoying this section. So Chisholm, can I come to you and give your 3 top tips for diversity and inclusion when it comes to organizational culture?
Yes. This is usually the interesting and sometimes difficult to implement part. Top 3 would be, I think, create and communicate meaningful value. That would be my first, and these values should not be on paper. I see values every day that I know is just all talk. And I will continue to say practice what you preach until I see people start practicing it. So do trainings, role play and workshops to ensure that employees truly understand the values that you champion. This way you communicate not only the values, but also the expected behaviors that align with those values. Values are not just, and oftentimes I see in companies where, when they do these trainings on values, or even D&I, they often do it for, those who face the customers, but this values and this practice and this workshop is not only for customer or outward facing employee, it is for everyone in the company. Even people within the company need to see their managers practicing those values in-house on a daily basis. This is how you create a strong organizational culture around, strong values and diversity and inclusion. My number 2 tip would be to enable and empower your employees. Leaders must give employees the right tools, resources, information, support, control, and power to make decisions. Leaders must set the expectations. You have to provide employees with what they need to succeed. And you also need to allow your employees to do the jobs without micromanaging every detail. And I know that this is difficult. I have employees in my company. And this is something that I actively and continually work on. I think there's a bit of arrogance to think that, oh no, I have it covered. Like, I'm good at this. So I tell you do something and I don't micromanage it. We're human. So also just being aware and crafting your organization in such a way where it's a process and where your employees can also come to you and say, hey, I don't feel enabled, I don't feel empowered. And then you'd be open to say, okay, what can I do to make things easier for you? That would be my number two. You know, I think it's very important to empower all employees and to build trust. And number three, I think, would be have difficult conversations and make difficult decisions. You know, if you do not hold your employees accountable, if you do, you will create a negative environment, you know, where even high-performing employees become frustrated. You know, they don't give as much effort, and eventually they will leave. So you have to get comfortable with having tough conversations with those who are not displaying expected behavior. You know, leaders must also make tough decisions and let go of employees who are not cutting it, you know. And I think it's also important to have, when, say, in your team, if somebody says something wrong or something that is not aligned with your values, it's important to have a conversation about it. I mean, do not judge. Perhaps this person has an unconscious bias that they've not dealt with, but use that as an opportunity to teach. But at the end of the day, you know, you make it clear that you will make the difficult decision if what you're supposed to do is not being done. So I guess those would be my top three, I think. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm just going to go to the chat. Thank you everybody for your engagement. It's really great to see that you guys are really getting engaged here. I'd just like to, am I pronouncing it correct? Is it Edie? Had a comment about the panel.
That's correct.
Thank you, thank you. I had a comment about the panel being an all-female panel. Is that representative of diversity? Actually, Chisholm, I'm going to come back to you on that one. Can you explain why you chose an all-female panel for today's event?
Okay. One, everyone in this panel is perfectly skilled and suitable to discuss the topic at hand. Two, with this series, we're actually doing, or with this event, we're actually creating a series of events where we will talk about different diversity parameters. And we plan to also bring on men and to ensure that everyone, gender-wise, would also be in the room. But for this particular conversation, I thought that the panel was representative as well as balanced enough. You know, this was a conversation I had with Faye and Allison, and I think Faye actually raised, you know, the question as should we have a man also in this conversation? And I would say yes, you know, and I would also love to know a lot of men who are having this conversation today as well in Norway or abroad, because oftentimes when these conversations are being had, I know some men who can talk about diversity and inclusion, but I can only count them on one hand, right? So I would also love to know more men who are having this conversation, and I would happily reach out to them to join in.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for that. And Sonia Gilder says that, you know, she would say that the time for discussing the business case for diversity is gone. We agree with you. The topic of this conversation today was less talk, more action. And Sonia is saying, you know, it's now time for inclusion. It's not by putting diverse groups together that we reap the effects of diversity on performance and innovation. We need inclusion, unconscious bias training, awareness, identify, mitigate, This is what's going to enable us to create a culture of inclusion, and we agree with you. That's why, as Chisholm said, we're putting on this series of events. That's why Diversify is actively going out and offering training to organizations across Norway. Business for Peace are doing lots of work when it comes to the numbers and the science and the metrics of diversity and inclusion. And that's why, like Chisholm said, she put this panel together today of people who have had many, many years of experience with diversity and inclusion, and really doing some work, active work in the community in Norway. So just going back to the top tips, Alison, I'm going to come to you now. And could I ask you for your 3 top tips for eliminating bias in the evaluation and promotion process?
Yes, but I wouldn't say that's my expertise. I had some points on company culture, maybe we can come back to. But yes, I'm not trained in human resources. So to be honest, I might not be actually the best suited to talk about performance evaluation specifically. I'm not sure, Faye or Chisholm, if you have a point there.
Okay, well, I'll come back to that then. Could I ask you for your 3 top tips for organizational culture?
Yes, great, thanks. I'd like to start with one that I think is actually quite fun and easy to do. And to me, that's holidays. Celebrating, acknowledging, and learning about different holidays that people on your team might be celebrating for themselves at home. It's great. There's Easter break, there's Christmas break. No one's saying just to stop having those holidays. But we had a little Kahoot quiz and party time to celebrate Diwali a few weeks ago. When you're in the office, are you also decorating for Chinese New Year? Are you talking about Hanukkah? I mean, if there's people on your teams that have holidays that are important to them, it's really nice to acknowledge that and to make space for that. And it doesn't even have to be religious, cultural. Maybe you love skiing and someone else loves lacrosse and wants to teach you about that. That can be a lunch and learn or an activity as well. So to me, it's all about curiosity and care for the people on your team and really getting to know each other. And making sure there is a space for them to share what's important to them as well. I would come back to Chisholm's point about training. I think it's important to acknowledge what we don't know and that we can all benefit from learning. An example from somewhere I used to work is that we did a training session on disability inclusion, and that was something I hadn't had so much exposure to before. And so you really can learn as a team things that you just might have never been aware of or never thought of. I think that's a really important base then for enabling people to speak up. I was listening into a webinar last week about a similar topic, and we realized amongst all of us, it's very often junior employees speaking up, and that's a really vulnerable situation for them to be in and can be really challenging. But if you've had a training session where you're on the same page, it's a little easier to be like, Chisholm last week said, this is maybe not best practice, or we could try that. At least you have something you can all reference as a point to go back to. So I would say those are some starting points.
Okay, thank you so much. Faye, I'm going to come to you, and could I ask you to give me 3 reasons why you feel it's important for companies to have diverse executive teams?
Yes, well, for many reasons. And I can say, first of all, perhaps for better customer engagement and representation, first of all, because every organization has customers and stakeholders, and these are not homogeneous groups. They're segments of people with diverse backgrounds, different social upbringings, different cultural and religious beliefs. And just having these groups represented at decision-making level, that can facilitate a better understanding of their needs, of their wants, of their pain points. This alone can make a huge difference in terms of what the company can offer to these different groups. So I think having diversity in executive teams can lead to better innovation, better improved product offerings for your customers, better customer service. And then at the end of the day, this just leads to improved customer experience overall. And another important stakeholder group is your employees. When your employees see that your executive team is open for diversity and inclusion, then this leads to a change in attitude for them. We all know that millennials and Gen Z, they place an enormous amount of importance on the diversity of their workplace. So when they see this happening, then they feel encouraged and motivated to work. They feel proud, a sense of pride to work for this organization, and at the same time to contribute to an inclusive organizational culture. And they would be more willing to express their ideas because they see that, okay, this organization, it's encouraging openness. And yeah, at the end of the day, can create a culture of inclusivity and openness, which is really important for building a healthy, diverse, and inclusive organization. And thirdly, we don't want to talk about the business case, but I feel at this point I have to mention it, that the research does show that if you do have more diverse teams in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, that it does at the end of the day lead to higher profits and better competitiveness for the organization.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'm just going to ask one more top tip question before we change it up a little bit and move on to something else. So Chisholm, could I ask you to, the question that I asked Alison earlier, your 3 top tips for eliminating bias in the evaluation and promotion process?
Okay, promotion process.
Yes, yes.
I think it would be wise to assess. Okay, I think to identify potential biases, we need to look at every step of that promotion process, from, how we are evaluating the people who we are under consideration. Actually, even before sorry, I'm trying to collect my thoughts. So basically what I'm trying to say here is whose name gets on the list. We have to evaluate that process first. And then when their names get on the list, because sometimes as well, I feel like people are nominated to say, hey, yeah, we nominated that person with disability, we nominated that trans person, but they just didn't win. But sometimes they really should be the person who gets promoted, who gets an increase in salary, what have you. So it's also evaluating that process first of nomination, and what is the intention behind this? What is the intention behind having all these people's name present? And then who do we offer that position to? And when you are going for the typical obvious person, let's say, for example, a middle-aged white man, it's also nice to assess, have I considered, this Muslim woman exactly the same way? Have I judged them or assessed them on the same, parameters, on the same basis, on the same efforts? So it's really about, I don't think this has a blueprint, but it's really about when we make decisions to then sit with that decision and go, why did I make this decision, and why was that other person not chosen? And if it's because of good feelings, or if it's because of, gut feeling, or they better fit with the organization, or, their managerial status, for example, would be more appealing or more accepted by high paying clients, then you need to reevaluate the rationale behind your decision. So it's first, you need to know why you were promoting certain groups, and then why you are not promoting certain groups. And of course, it could turn out that the typical or the expected person gets the promotion, and that's okay, but you need to be able to back that up with facts, not feelings.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to touch on that, when it comes to recruitment, could you potentially promote from within? I recently had a friend and a colleague who applied for two internal positions, and their companies didn't even acknowledge them. Now, they're a small team of people. They didn't even receive an acknowledgement for the applications that they'd put in, and the companies hired externally. These were 2 people who were fully qualified to be able to be promoted internally. So really, could you, for example, promote from within instead of recruiting externally? Okay, so I'm gonna just change it up a little bit now, and I want to get a little bit personal with everybody here. And I'm going to ask you to share a personal experience where you yourself were challenged to be a little bit more inclusive and show some more diversity in your pathways, your neural pathways, the way that you were thinking. I'll come to Alison. Can I ask you to start, please? So were you personally challenged to be more diverse and inclusive?
Yes, I think, I hadn't thought about this in advance. I think what the first thing that sort of comes to mind is how some organizations are now putting gender pronouns in their email signatures and whatnot. And now in some meetings I've been in, not in Norway, but elsewhere, when you introduce yourself, it's common to say, your name, your preferred pronouns, your title, whatever else about you. And that was just something I had no awareness of at that time. So then it was sort of an exercise in self-education of understanding why that was so important and when it was appropriate to ask everyone to do that or not. There's also challenges of asking people to sort of out themselves by pushing that, but some people really appreciate it. So there isn't one right answer, but that was a sort of recent, just a few years ago for me, that was a great learning opportunity.
Okay, thank you so much. Faye, I'm going to come to you.
Yes, I can tell about an incident that happened. It's not an incident, but more of an experience. I was at an event in the Culture House here in Oslo, and the event was about sustainability. And we had an open floor, and we were inviting comments about the topic itself. And then this older Norwegian gentleman, he stood up and he said, his comment was, "Why don't you organizations," as he was pointing to the companies that were on stage, "hire retirees as consultants to help you solve your problems?" And everyone went silent because this wasn't in line with the topic that was being discussed. And then he went on to say, even though he's retired, he still has a lot of value to bring to the workplace. He doesn't want to stop working. Why isn't there space for seniors and retirees in the current job market? And I mean, I think this really was an awe moment for the audience and for me as well, because given my age and people within my age group, we never consider, age as a factor in the recruitment process. And so this really woke me up in terms of what space does the job market create for people who are retired and still looking for work, they want to consult, or even seniors, and the value and the knowledge that they can actually bring to an organization. And there is actually a brilliant woman named Christine Lagnes, and she works for an organization called CISU, and they're working on this issue of getting seniors in the workplace and senior entrepreneurship. And it really goes to show you that you always have to challenge yourself, be open-minded, be willing to learn new things and unlearn biases. So yeah, that was my experience that woke me up a bit.
Thank you. And to yourself, Chisholm?
I think in line with what Alison talked about gender pronouns, I initially was quite uncomfortable or insecure rather about how to address people outside the gay or lesbian grouping, within the LGBTQI community. And I had to learn particularly with regards to trans people. And my insecurity often led to my not being able to ask, say, the right questions, or feeling insecure to ask questions because I don't want to look stupid. So what I did was I sought out trans people and said, hey, I have a bunch of stupid questions to ask. Would you mind? And they've been so kind to explain to me how I need to talk, even down to pronouns. When people people who address themselves, for example, as they. So to make sure to include that when you're having a conversation. So even down to sometimes when we have, so when we're describing events for her space and say we're talking about women, oftentimes some member of my team might say, oh, but we're talking about women, shouldn't we say she? Now, having learned that she is not inclusive enough, that we have to say they, because that includes a lot more people who might identify as women, but might not identify with the pronoun she. So I think learning in that sense, I think, but I also think I'm challenged on the daily, honestly. I had a conversation with some people a week or two ago. We're talking about someone we knew who was looking for work, but it might be difficult for him to get work because he had a visible beard and he's from the Middle East. And what impression that gives, you know, to potential employers about who he is and how that asserts his difference, you know, more clearly than it asserts somebody else's. And it was also that immediate wake-up call to have that conversation with ourselves, like, no, we cannot talk like this. We cannot do this. This is not okay, you know, and that comes up time to time. So I think for us, at least for me, I think it's easier to acknowledge or appreciate or even see when a bias is coming up because it's something that I actively work on. But working on it doesn't mean I don't have them still, or that the people I surround myself with or the people I work with who have the best intention, champion diversity and inclusion, do not also have these thoughts that have been ingrained in us, you know, across, well, throughout our lifetime, in media, in the way, in things we see on TV. So yeah, this happens. It continues to happen with me actually on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, thank you so much, Chisholm.
Hyacinth, sorry to interrupt. Can I just add something to that quickly?
Sure.
Yes, I just it's the same process with me as well, Chisholm, and I just wanted to read something quickly that I saw today, because you know, and as one of my measures for inclusion, I was writing down breastfeeding or breast pumping rooms for nursing moms on women, and then I read this today, and it was like, you know, eye-opening for me. A breastfeeding charity in the UK has sparked controversy for allowing men who identify as females to attend meetings for mothers struggling to feed their babies. So trans men, trans women, and non-binary individuals may choose to breastfeed or chest feed their babies, the charity says. So you do not need to have given birth to breastfeed or chest feed, as we can also see in the experiences of those nursing adopted babies. And chest feeding is a term that tends to be given to non-cis males who breastfeed their babies, since the word breast can be often uncomfortable for them after their personal experiences. And it was very interesting to read, because just, you know, yesterday I was writing rooms for women, and then today you read something and said, okay, Faye, your thinking is wrong. So yeah, it's the learning process is constant.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And just to add to that as well, on a personal, sharing something personal here, when I had my daughter, I was quite ill, and so her father, who was absolutely dying to be a dad, was so happy to be able to bottle feed her, because he thought, well, I can be included in the process. And so he, you know, would be bottle feeding, but he said he struggled when he would go out to find places where he could change her nappy, change her bum, because, you know, quite often the sign was women and babies, mothers and babies. And so as a father, he really struggled to find places to be able to change. So that was just on the tail end of that, sharing a personal thing here. So Alison, I'd like to come to you and just ask, I'm going to round off the questions now, because I would like to engage the audience and answer some of the audience's questions. Alison, what simple measures can a company put in place to start making immediate diversity and inclusion improvements?
I think it's yeah, then a good maybe summary of some things that we've that we've addressed, I mean, to me, number one is always listening and actually caring. You know, whether it's a town hall with your staff or one-on-one conversations, just to start to learn, to realize what the problems are in your organization and some tips from within, what could be improved. Take a look at your recruiting practices, your hiring practices, take a look at how you're doing your social time, and very likely you would benefit from hiring, doing a training session as well. I won't recap all of them, so there's others to say.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. That was really practical. Chisholm, should companies actually roll out diversity and inclusion training for their employees?
Absolutely. Completely 110%. Yes. I think that companies need to make the investment in this. It is important. You should think about diversity and inclusion the same way you would think about going to the gym. You know, you don't go to the gym once and you get a six-pack. And even after you get a six-pack, you have to keep working out to maintain that six-pack. You know, so I think that it is actually important to make it kind of like a regular, you know, when you get to the point that you want to be, then make it as a regular jog your memory. Hey, let's refresh our memory. What has happened? What has changed? Because the whole conversation about diversity and inclusion, because it involves people, it means that it's dynamic. And because it's dynamic, it's constantly changing. And we have to keep updating ourselves. Like, think about it, you know, with, I don't know, the latest apps coming out these days, from TikTok to God knows what else, or, you know, like programming languages. Like, you need to continue to learn to stay on top of your game. So I think, yes, they need to roll out training for their employees, but also, one of the things I try to emphasize is that diversity and inclusion and strong values did not become part and parcel of your organization if there is no buy-in from leadership. Like, the management must buy in, they must breathe and live what they say, you know, what they believe. So I think they also need training, but it doesn't stop with management, but the buy-in is imperative, and then it goes across the entire company. So yes, I think so.
Okay, thank you so much. And just to round off here, I would like to, actually, I'm going to come back to Faye and just ask you for your top tips for employee engagements, 3 top tips for employee engagements.
Yes, we covered a lot of tips already. I think I'll just re-emphasize perhaps some of them that was mentioned a bit more. And I think it's really important to facilitate a culture of openness and open feedback without repercussions.
Yeah.
So developing internal systems and processes for collecting ideas and feedback, that can be really, really helpful in engaging your employees and getting them to open up and share their expression, their ideas and their views on what works and is not working in the workplace. I can say that for us in Business for Peace, we have a team meeting where we openly air our issues and our challenges, and we know that we can say what we are facing without facing any serious repercussions or consequences after. And this works really well for us, and we're a small team, so it's important to find out what would work for your team, but to always have a system in place to ensure that there is open feedback. I think also Alison had mentioned that we celebrate different employees. So I think celebrating your employees is also important. And this shows that you are aware of them and their culture and their cultural values as well. Do they need time off for Eid or Diwali, given that these are not public holidays here? You know, do they need access to a prayer room? Do men and women now need special rooms for, you know, pumping breast milk or for breastfeeding? You know, how handicap friendly or how suited is your organizations for employees with different abilities? And it shouldn't only be in your organization, but also it should be reflected in your events. If you're an organization that has a lot of retail stores, or even on your website, you know, how you express yourself and how you express your employees. So I think showing consideration and this level of consideration for your employees can also improve employee engagement. And I think for my last step, I will just say, reward your staff for meaningful contributions. You know, it sounds very simple, but a lot of organizations don't simply recognize the value of their employees' contributions. And I think doing this in a meaningful way can have a great impact on employee engagement.
Thank you so much. Chisholm, could I ask you, excuse me, how can companies identify whether their dominant culture is inclusive or not?
I think that there are, practical ways that they can, based on what both Faye, Allison, and myself have talked about today. But I think one of the most basic ways they can do it is look around the room. Is everyone in the room? In your meetings, in your organization, is the diversity as a metrics or as a science, is that represented? And then if they're not, you have a problem. If they are, then you ask them how they feel to give you feedback. So I think a lot of times employees within companies can actually give you feedback. Sometimes you have companies that they have some diverse people there, but the diverse people there often feel, they are not seen, they are not heard, they are not empowered. So ask them, perhaps they don't feel comfortable doing it because they fear repercussions. So make that process safe for them by making the process anonymous, for example. So ask for honest feedback from your employees and start that. The thing about charity begins at home. Start from your home, see where that leads you, and then try to see how you're perceived from the outside and the type of culture that you're perceived to have from the outside people. But even within your organization, I bet that somebody, of people can tell you the truth as well about how they feel about the culture.
Okay. Well, the three of you are leaders in the organizations that you work for. So I'd just like to ask you, and this will be the last question that I ask before I invite audience participation with the questions. We have some already that we will be answering. How do you, what measures does your company have in place, and how do you incorporate diversity and inclusion in your organizations? I'll start with Allison.
It's definitely a work in progress for us. So it's step one to be aware that we can always be doing better. We're just starting to now operationalize some of our human resource policies and procedures. So that's a step that we're going through. Some of the things that we've already talked about, such as feedback and listening and all team meetings and celebrations. That's something we actively do. One thing we haven't talked as much about yet maybe is representation in the work that you're doing. So for us, Faye is very focused on this, about having representation on panels that she's planning. If artists, if we're thinking about who you're profiling on social media, who you're interviewing, you can really have an impact in that space as well. And it's just sort of always active efforts. So yeah, I would reiterate a lot of the key points and to say we're absolutely not done. We have a long way to go as an organization, and I'm happy that we're at least taking some steps. And as soon as Corona allows it to gather again, Chisholm's going to come in and do a workshop with us, because we'd recognize how valuable that would be, because our team is actually primarily not born in Norwegian, and so we're from very different contexts from across the globe. And there's a real desire to let's just get on the same page with what are each of our assumptions, and how is dialogue changing, and what can we learn? So that's sort of our next few months of starting point.
Okay, thank you so much. And Faye, do you have something? I know you guys are in the same organization. You might have different perspective on what you're doing. So could I ask you to answer that as well?
Yeah, it's a bit similar to what Allison said. I'm the programming manager. So when And designing events, it's very important to me, as I mentioned before, to have diverse representation. I try as much as possible to ensure that most voices are given a spot to discuss the issues that are relevant for them. And I think it's also very important to create a meeting place for people at the top level where they're able to meet people working at the grassroots level, because that is where real change can be created. And it's something that we think about internally, as Alison said, within the organization as well, our channels for feedback, how we celebrate our employees. And I must say that Alison and our admin manager, Elisa, they do a very good job of ensuring that this is facilitated and also scheduling digital social time so we can get to know each other a bit more. I just also want to say that I saw some questions about, challenge in management. And this is, I wouldn't say that we challenge our manager, but, if there is an issue, I think that we are an organization, not just the management, but also other employees, we can challenge their views and their perspectives on certain issues, or say, well, maybe, we can view this another way. So that's something that we also try to encourage within the organization as well, challenging perspectives.
Great, thank you so much. And Chisholm, we're going to come to you in just a moment. After Chisholm answers, we're going to invite some questions from the audience. We do have a few questions already. So if any of you are sitting there and you have some questions that you would like to ask, please pop them into the chat, and then we will do a Q&A session when Chisholm answers after this. Thank you. So Chisholm, we come to you.
Thanks, Harrison. In my organization, we are currently 9 employees, and 9 of us, or 9 people actively working on the team, and 9 of us come from 11 countries across the world, because some people have 2 nationalities. For me, I have hired or brought in every single person on the team. And for me, I actively seek people who are different from me, completely different, in background, in academics, in point of view, in age, in how we see the world. In my organization, we have, I think our youngest is 24 and we have up until close to 60. I don't consider age or where you come from or language as a limitation. I consider it as, a strength. And I would like to also incorporate, there's a lot more I would like to do. We are mainly women. We have 1 man. I would like to bring in more men as well. So it's something I keep in mind as we grow. But I think, with regards to diversity and inclusion, it's also creating an environment where my team can challenge me. And let me tell you, I don't always like it, but I almost demand it. And at the time when I'm being challenged, I'm just like, ugh. But then, I'm just like, okay, this is necessary. This is how we grow. This is how we improve. So I think that for us, creating a culture where we accept that 1, we know enough, and 2, we don't know enough. Having those 2 coincide with each other allows us the humility to learn and grow, and creating a safe space where we could say stupid things, because we want to learn. If you have a bias, I'd rather you say it and let's discuss it and maybe change your mind, as opposed to keeping it in and not discussing it because you feel you will be judged by other people in the room. So for us, it's just an active process of learning and unlearning that continues, and creating that environment where we can continue to challenge each other to do and be better.
Great, thank you so much. So Faye and Chisholm, you both just mentioned challenging management. So we'll come to Sarah's question here. She says, I wonder how the panelists would challenge management in how they define talent and how we hold them to their definitions and apply those definitions in the hiring process. The name of a school is not the same as talent, though many may seem to think so. Points of view from the panel? So how would you challenge management in how they define talent and how we hold them to their definitions and apply those definitions in the hiring process?
I can share a few thoughts. I'm not sure it'll answer the whole thing, but I think that people, when they write job descriptions, myself included, we're quite guilty of thinking everything is necessary, you know, like it needs to be 5 years experience and you need this master's. But I mean, I recently finished a master's. I learned a lot. Did I have a career before then? Yes. You know, these things about willing to, you know, give it your all. Well, do you have to be willing to be burnt out to do a good job? So trying to be really conscious at the, even just the drafting phase of your posting of what is actually a requirement. And it's usually more some skill sets than just what are nice to haves or things that you're maybe exaggerating a bit about. And then there are different systems, you know, you can use different, you know, grids or tracking mechanisms throughout the process to measure people's skills. One thing that came to mind might be slightly a tangent, but is I've seen only one job ad recently where they said that if you get to round 2 and you're asked to do a homework assignment, they will pay you, this was I think a US $150 for it. And to me, that's a very inclusive practice, because if you're asking someone to spend 10, 20 hours for you unpaid, they might not be able to. They might already have an evening job they have to cancel to do that work. So it's, yeah, it's really keeping that 360 view. So that's a starting answer, is to be really mindful of what you're actually putting down as a requirement.
Okay.
If I may add to that. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead, please.
I agree with everything Alison has said. I think as well, in just on the personal basis, when I work with companies or leaders, I often ask why, because I am genuinely curious as to why they do what they do. So even something as simple as asking, but why so? You know, do you really need, like Alison said, you know, 5 years experience, or do you really need that person or that person? What is the argument for this? I think oftentimes you actually get people to realize or acknowledge their own biases, the things that they put out without even thinking about it. You know, I think that in practicing diversity and inclusion, it also needs to be a space where we have conversation as opposed to lecturing, you know, leaders what they need to do. So sometimes the best way to teach someone anything is to ask them why they do something, and then allow them to come to that reasoning by themselves. You know, I think that is one of the most effective ways in which I work with executive members of companies, just by asking them, so why did you do that? But why and how? You know, and you just see them unfold in your face. And then you're like, I should have done this, right? And you're just like, yeah, well, you said so yourself. So this is something I find quite effective.
Thank you. So Miriam and Lisa have touched on individuals, employees without power because they're not necessarily part of management. You know, how do companies empower their employees, the average Joe Blogs, everyday individual, to contribute towards diversity and equality in an organization? Or how can employees feel more empowered to contribute?
Can I take this?
Sure.
Okay. I think Faye might had said something about employee engagement, and I think this is where it comes in, because I'm also reading Lisa's, I hope I'm saying her name right, question here or comment. I think that employee engagement, you know, if you, as a company, you need to, there needs to be skill and leadership development. You know, they need to know that they have the power to ascend. I think supporting their well-being and productivity, promoting transparency and meaningfulness, implementing, you know, agile performance management. There's a long list of the things you can do to make employees feel like they are a part of your company. Because the reality is, if employees feel like they have a stake, they will go to war for you. You know, they will create more and be more productive. Now, that said, of course, the responsibility should never fall on the employees, which is why I said earlier on about there needs to be buy-in from the leadership. It's all about leadership, because then if, like I have a daughter who everything I do, she's a sponge, she just takes it in. So I'm really conscious about, saying bad words, because I know the next day she's going to say it. And I think that's the same thing with leadership, is if the people you manage see you not take seriously the value that you say you champion, then how are they supposed to take those values seriously as well? If you don't make tough decisions where those values are broken, how are they supposed to get behind what you're trying to create? But I do think that employee engagement is important, because it's not only about bringing an outsider to tell you how you can be better. I think it's important to engage your house. You cannot solve a problem in a house by bringing somebody from the outside who knows nothing about what is happening there. So it's imperative to engage your house, but you have to create a safe environment where they can come to you and talk to you. And in the case that that is not possible, and sometimes even if it's possible, then make the process anonymous for them, where they can share those views without fear of repercussion. So I do think that leadership have the responsibility, but to be a good leader, you also need to know how to follow. And in that regard, you need to listen to the people who work for you, the people who make you your money. You need to be able to take in their input and implement it as a part of your complete organizational process.
All right, thank you so much.
Can I also follow up on that point?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes, I just want to follow up on the last point that Shizome said about leaders being open to following. And I think, yes, it is on leadership to set the organizational culture and the tone and the systems feedback and all of these things. But at the same time, if it isn't being done, or if progress is being slow, then there are small things that employees can do to perhaps create, some sort of shift within the organization. If you notice that certain people aren't being included in events, then just invite them. If you want to celebrate somebody's festivities, then organize a small, organizational a gathering among the team. And by these small actions, you're also showing your colleagues that you care about them and you would like to include them, maybe even if it isn't coming from management. And then these small things can one day, snowball into something bigger, where leadership recognizes, okay, then maybe we need to have a more serious discussion about this. So, I mean, sometimes, employees should take the initiative and find ways to maybe empower themselves, even if it's not coming from leadership.
Okay, great. Thank you. Alison, do you have something to add there?
Yeah, I really agree with both those perspectives, that the burden, or the responsibility, I should say, is on leaders. And yet it so often falls to employees. And I guess one little thing I would then add is maybe there's middle management, or sort of relying on allyship. So if the problem is at the very, very top and it's too vulnerable for you to speak up, maybe your line manager or someone else's line manager that you trust, maybe there's a good person in HR that you can be open with. Maybe a few employees can go and raise a complaint together with power in numbers. I mean, I'm hoping you're not in sort of dire situations, but that, yes, it is leaders' responsibility, but to Faye's point, that there are actions you can take, and if you feel inspired to, or the desire to, just seek out support where you can.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. Gina says, how can employers encourage diversity in age and experience through considering whether support can be done through short-term project support as opposed to broadly described permanent employees? Did you get that? So how can employers encourage diversity in age and experience? Could they possibly look at short-term projects as opposed to broadly taking on people as permanent employees? Could that be a solution, or what other solutions do you have?
I think it's one of the ways. My experience with Norway, and why oftentimes, some companies or hiring managers feel that they are not bringing on that foreign person or that Muslim person or that brown person or that white person who has a different point of view is because they don't want to take the risk if they get a permanent job. I mean, in Norway, you literally have to set the house on fire and kill everyone inside to get fired. So they find that, well, I'm being extreme, but you get my point. Like it's, what I mean is it's not as easy as say in the US to let people go. So in Norway, I think one of the ways to get to know employees, to get to know their skills, their abilities, is to give them, it could be project basis, like it could literally also be internships. Like with the work I do at Diversify, so not her space, but Diversify, what we often find is that skilled immigrants in Norway cannot find work. I've met people with master's degrees and PhDs who cannot get a job as a cleaner. Oftentimes it's that fear of the unknown, that fear of something that is different. So one of the ways I also advocate when I talk with companies is to say, hey, how about you bring them on as an intern? There is no, what's it called? There is no commitments that you cannot, cut off. This is not for life, but at least you get the opportunity to have them in the room to see how they work. And I think most employers should actually do this just beyond, because at the end of the day, we can talk about diversity and inclusion, but there also needs to be company fit. It's not important to have a very diverse team that actually cannot do the work. So it's also good to make sure that people you bring in have been tested and tried and have a track record of producing results. So I would say then in this case that allowing them on for short-term projects, or short-term being anywhere from 3 to 6 months, or even longer-term project that is not permanent but temporary, is also, I think, a good step in the right direction.
Can I say, I think this question is such an interesting example for me, sitting here now questioning some of my own assumptions, because I'm usually taught that contract is bad because it's insecure. And there's many negative sides to insecure work. So usually the question is skewed towards more stability. So yeah, thank you for that perspective, because it's a really interesting alternate view that it's maybe giving people different opportunities, chances to do something short term if long term doesn't work for them. So I think that's, yeah, I was sitting here thinking, okay, interesting. I'm now, yes, challenging one of my own assumptions. And for age, one thing I would say, I'm not sure if it's a Norway standard or European, but in Canada, you would never put your birthday on your resume or your photo. And it's very unusual to me that that's common practice here, because it's against the law to discriminate based on age or to make assumptions about what someone looks like. So you don't have to put your birthday on your resume. You don't have to put what year you earned your degree. There are yeah, different things you can do to be age neutral.
And if I could add to that, actually, that was one of the things that surprised me in Norway. I've gone to, because of the work we do at Diversify, just to understand the experiences of people within our target group and our community, the challenges that they faced. I've gone to quite a few informational events that have been hosted by some of the top companies in Norway. And oftentimes it comes down to the CV. I mean, which of course is not realistic, but they make it all about the CV, like, oh, maybe your CV should be this way. Maybe you should put your picture, you should put if you're married, your age, all that stuff. And to me, as a Black woman, I'm thinking, no, I'm not going to do that, and I know the other brown person is not going to do that. Perhaps if you come from a majority group where you've not been pigeonholed or discriminated against, you might not think of this as a problem. But I know that sometimes somebody might see me and my braids and decide and make an opinion about me that is not true. Even in my work today, I am, like I said, I'm an economist, and I often go into, rooms with executive level members of companies in shipping, in oil and gas, in renewable energy. And I have had situations where I walk into rooms and people think I'm the help, but actually they're there to see me. And my decision determines whether they receive funding from my clients or not. You know, so having these preconceived notions, I see how it affects me, even as an incredibly privileged woman, you know, never mind for the people who do not have the access that I have. So yeah, that I also find that quite troubling.
And it's funny that you should say that. You know, we are currently, what, 39 people in this meeting here, 39 people with 39 different points of view, you know, and, you know, talking about the CVs and the photos on the CVs, I purposely put my photo on my CV because if a company, they see who I am straight away. And if they don't want to hire me based on the fact of what they see, I don't want to work in that company. And you know, the company that I work in, well, that I have been working in very recently, Photobarn RS, you know, that's one of the reasons why they hired me. You know, they got to see you know, they saw me on my CV and they were interested to say, hey, come in. You know, they saw my experience, married those two things up. I went in, I had a chat. And, you know, 10 months into working with these guys, I originally started as a project manager. 10 months in, they turned around and said, hey, you know what? You know more about business than we do. Can you become our CEO? And, you know, these are three Norwegian men who own this company who graciously stepped down and asked me as a Black woman, a foreigner, to step up into the leadership role. So, you know, I do it on purpose. I had my photo to my CV on purpose because I want to walk in head high, not feeling as though, you know, they've actually accepted me because of what they've seen on my CV, this picture. So I just wanted to ask you guys, what kind of training do you actively engage in your organizations? And I'm asking you this because we were nearly 50 people in this meeting today. 50 people on a Wednesday afternoon attending a webinar about diversity and inclusion tells you that this is a very important topic. Diversity and inclusion, like Chisholm said earlier, is not a one-stop shop. You don't just, you know, pop into a webinar and you know it all. It needs to be an ongoing conversation. So it demands an investment of time, of resources. It's an ongoing thing, you know, for leaders out there on this webinar. I would definitely encourage you to invest in your companies, in training your employees. Diversity and culture, diversity, inclusion, organizational culture, all things that would really have a positive impact on your organization. I'm not saying these things to sell the services of Diversify. Diversify do offer these services. I'm just saying this to encourage you because I think it's very important. So can I ask you guys, the three panelists, what training are you investing in for your employees?
I can go. Oh, we do a lot of different trainings, from communication strategies to organization culture strategy, which actually Hyacinth runs for us. Our communication strategy training, we have a wonderful guy called Bill Harris who runs it for us. I personally run self-development workshops for my team, and we are soon starting also a diversity and inclusion training, both for the team members that do not have the skill sets in it, and also for the team members, including myself, who are well versed in it. So for us, we continue to take on, you know, topics not just on diversity and inclusion, but we continue to take on different societal challenges and topics with curiosity. I know that Ampi, our community director at her space, spends a lot of time in bookshops, bookstores. So she's always coming in with the next book about, you know, feminism or equality or diversity and inclusion. And, you know, she's not subtle. Like, she comes to each person and she's like, yeah, this is for you, read this. So, I mean, it's a combined effort, but it's something that we actively invest in and think about.
Great, thank you. Alison Faye?
Yeah, I think that's there's a lot we can learn from even from what you just said. So thank you for sharing all that. In terms of diversity and inclusion, we said we have committed to hiring Chisholm to come do a workshop with us. We just think that'd be really valuable in person. But it's just step one of probably many that will be needed. We do have sort of an open bookshelf and small budgets for approving books or magazines or newspaper subscriptions. I pretty much greenlight anything my staff wants to do during the day that's a webinar or learning session. I think it's really important for their own development, organizational development, and interest, and keeping people happy and engaged as well. So things like this, yes, take 2 hours out of your day, please, to observe and participate, and then ideally sharing a few highlights with the team at a team meeting or in our group chat. A lot of link sharing going on. I think because we work a lot with sustainable development goals and entrepreneurs globally, it's not always diversity and inclusion as a title, but we're learning about what's happening in Colombia, what's happening in Lebanon, what it means to run a business there right now. So I think we're learning about this in maybe less structured ways. And so it's a good challenge for me to think about how we can be more structured about it too.
Okay, thank you. For the senior managers on the call, it's really interesting that Miriam's put here, this is how important it is to be diverse in your marketing and company communication, your branding and how you present yourselves. Miriam says here that if after doing research, she sees that there's only white people being represented, she doesn't even send a CV. How many other people are there that potentially don't send a CV and apply for a position just based on your branding and how you present yourself as an organization? So if you're not diverse in your branding, you're potentially losing out on some really good candidates. And
Hyacinth, could I add a thing as well? I think that one of the things I often hear, where we talk about diversity and inclusion and an organization's ability to actually invest in it or take it seriously, is oftentimes people say, oh, we're such a young company, we're really small. And I always ask, how small are you? And at what point are you big enough to start taking this important matters seriously? And I think challenging the construct around what people think they need to do with diversity and inclusion, because I've seen some questions on here about how do you keep talking about diversity and inclusion when people don't seem to care? And I think you do it, it's frustrating, yes, but I think you do it with a lot of patience, some empathy, and persistence, because it cannot continue forever, especially if you are at the receiving end. But I also want to say that for people who are, quote unquote, in the majority group, use your voice, because sometimes your voice is better heard than the voice of a minority, because a minority person might be seen as, she again, this person again, of course you're always victimized. But when it's coming from somebody who looks like you, who you see as an equal, who has similar values, or you think has similar values and background as you do, I think that it makes more of an impact, and this is also where, for me personally, I also try to recognize my privilege. I know that I can say things to certain groups of people that my team might not necessarily be able to, because they don't feel like it's their place, or they're not comfortable to do so. So it's also searching within ourselves. I know we're talking about workplaces and employers here, but it's also us as individuals, reflecting and saying, what is my role and what can I actually do to make an impact? Because silence is agreement, so if you have those that thought process in your head, then you say, what can I do to make this situation better? And I absolutely think that it is important to invest money specifically in learning about these things, because I personally know that when I invest my money, I take things seriously. Like if I have to go run, some days when it's wet, I'm just like, or when it's dark, I get lazy. But if I know I've paid a lot of money you better believe I will get myself up and go because I have paid money for it. And I think it's also respectful to the people who do the work. You know, like everyone we bring in at Her Space and Diversify to come run sessions for us, even though we don't have like a huge budget to pay them, we offer them something because it is respectful of their time. And also the, the emotional, what's the word? Like burden that it brings. So I just wanted to say this, but also mainly to leave everyone with the thoughts around you as yourself, as an individual. There's a lot you can do in your office, you know, in your homes.
Great, thank you so much, Chisholm.
Can I also quickly respond to Miriam?
Sorry, just a moment, please. Alison, thank you so much for joining us today, and do know that you have another engagement that you need to run to. So thank you so much for your insight and for joining us in this panel today. It's been, you know, amazing to have you, and you know, we send you off with blessings.
Thank you so much, everybody. I look forward to continuing the conversation, and yeah, enjoy the last little bit of this.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you. So we just have 5 minutes left. Faye, could you be very brief, because I have another question that I'd like to ask.
I just wanted to say something quickly to Miriam about her comments, and I completely understand being discouraged if you go to an organization and you see all white employees, but if that organization is guilty of unconscious bias, and it so happens that they have all these workers with similar backgrounds and similar experience, then your CV would perhaps stand out when you do apply for a position. So I understand that it is discouraging, but I would like to encourage you to continue applying, because you never know, you will meet one day an open-minded manager who is perhaps sick and tired of having the same room with people from similar backgrounds and would like to be challenged and would like something different. So just keep on applying.
Yes, I actually challenged an organization that I was working with over 5,000 people, and all of their marketing was with, you know, one demographic, and I challenged them and they weren't even aware of it. So they then changed their marketing. Very quickly, Johan asked, we talk about diversity and inclusion in the context of corporations and business. We talk about various KPIs and innovation, talent retention, etc. But how can we talk about it in a diverse manner? How do we talk about diversity and inclusion across the dinner table, for example? Or how does an NGO talk about it as opposed to a large corporation? Did you get that?
So the question is, how do we talk about diversity in different spaces in our lives?
Yes, yeah, in a more dynamic, so it's dynamic across genres.
Explain myself very briefly.
So maybe Johan can clarify.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what I meant is about the bigger picture discussion when it gets more sociological, when it gets more political. So how do we gather the guts, so to speak, to respectfully and assertively talk about this when it's beyond and outside a workplace, right? Because it seems like a really tough conversation to have, but in my opinion, it's totally worth it. So I would like to ask the panelists how they tackle this.
Thanks, Johan. I think it comes to educating yourself and arming yourself with the language, the tools, and the resources that you need to respond calmly. And sometimes it's not always possible, because I've been there, but arming yourself with the knowledge that you need to respond. Talking about diversity is not comfortable. And if, say, people in the majority group feel that it is uncomfortable, imagine that you should always just know that it is even more uncomfortable for that minority person who's bringing it up. But these conversations need to be had. I mean, if we to solve any problem, we have to first admit that there is a problem, right? So I think it's having the courage to speak up, but also assessing the situation. Maybe speaking up is not always the best thing to do in certain situations if it would bring you harm or could lead to something that could negatively impact you. But when you can, you could always ask questions. So I feel that for me, you know, if somebody says, for example, I hate gay people, you know, if I assess that situation, maybe the first thing I say to them is not, oh, you're a bigot. Maybe the first thing I say would be, why? How many gay people do you know? And why do you have this opinion about them? So I think one of the ways to bring up things in spite of fear, not without it, but in spite of it, is to just ask questions and see where they are coming from, and see also if by asking them questions and challenging their assumptions, they can change their minds.
Absolutely. This is something, you know, it's our personal responsibility to be inclusive and to, you know, for myself, I have a 20-year-old daughter, and it's just a matter of fact that on a daily basis, diversity and inclusion is a part of our everyday conversation. You know, so I challenge her on her acceptance of others and how she interacts with others and how she speaks to people and how inclusive she is in her friendship circles. So, you know, that is something that we talk about. So I, you know, cross the border from it just being a workplace conversation to also being a part of my home life conversation as well.
I know we're out of time almost. I just wanted to add to that, you know, on having difficult conversation. I had a couple of years ago a conversation with a very close and important family member about homosexuality. You know, this person in my family taught, you know, it was a sin against God, and it, you know, it was a choice. You know, they had all this preconceived notion. And I had to just say, but why? Why do you think this? How many gay people do you know? And, you know, and sometimes also using the Bible, because this person is religious, so I'm using the Bible to address them. The Bible also says, thou shalt not judge. So why are you judging? You know, but also just asking questions along these lines. And also when you find that it is difficult, because I got to a point where it was impossible to actually rationalize and have a reasonable conversation with them, I had to put my foot down, because I had many gay friends in my life who I loved. And I said, if you respect me, then you should also respect these people or this group of people. But I will invite them home so you can meet them and have a conversation with them and see how you feel about this. And I did invite one of my friends who is gay. And when he showed up, you know, this member of my family, you know, had a conversation with them and was completely blown away, like, oh my gosh, I can't even tell that, you know, he's gay. He's so awesome. And I'm like, what did you expect? You know, so sometimes challenging these notions, but doing it as kindly as possible. And I know it's not always possible.
Yes, thank you so much, Chisholm. Unfortunately, we are out of time. This has been such an inspiring and invigorating conversation, and people have been engaging all the way through. Thank you to every single person who attended today. This is the first part of a series. We will be continuing the conversation, so stay tuned to Diversify in Her Space. You will see more information coming up soon about subsequent events. And also, you know, if you would like any diversity and equality training, or if you would also like other types of training, then please, by all means, feel free to contact Diversify. They offer a wide range of training services for corporations and individuals, coaching, counseling as well. So, you know, by all means, contact Diversify. But thank you so much for being on this webinar with us today. We value and appreciate every single one of you, and we look forward to the next session.